Okay, ready to dive into this pile of research you sent over about the Nordic hamstring exercise?
Yeah, let's do it.
It's going to be good. You've got a bunch of articles here by Tobias Alt and that crew. They're all about the NHE, obviously.
Right.
Modulating the Nordic hamstring exercise from zero to hero. A stepwise progression explored in a high-performance athlete. That one's from the Journal of Athletic Training from 2022.
Okay.
We've also got Nordic hamstring exercise training induces improved lower limb swing phase mechanics and sustained strength preservation in sprinters. That's from the Scandinavian Journal of Medicine and Science in Sports 2021.
Yeah.
And velocity-specific and time-dependent adaptations following a standardized Nordic hamstring exercise training. Same journal, but from 2018.
Wow, you really did your homework.
Oh, there's more. Speed matters in Nordic hamstring exercise from the journal Sports in 2023 by Augustsson and his colleagues.
Nice.
And we can't forget the NHE evaluation criteria, introducing reliable rating scales for assessing Nordic hamstring exercise quality by Alt and Schmidt from Sports Medicine Open in 2021.
This is going to be a deep dive for sure.
So basically, you want the full rundown on the NHE.
Absolutely. Everything from why it's so effective to how to get the most out of it.
All right, let's kick things off with the basics.
Yeah.
What makes the NHE so unique compared to all those other hamstring exercises out there?
Well, it's all about eccentric strength.
Eccentric strength.
Exactly. While most exercises focus on the concentric phase, where your muscles shorten as you lift, the NHE is all about that lengthening motion, the eccentric phase.
Okay, so like the down part of a squat.
Exactly. It's like lowering yourself down slowly and with control during a squat versus just dropping down. That control, that's what really strengthens the hamstrings and helps prevent those nasty strains you hear about.
So it's kind of like giving your hamstrings a crash course in deceleration.
Exactly. And that's super important for athletes who are constantly sprinting and jumping. Their hamstrings are working overtime to slow down those powerful movements.
Makes sense. So we've got eccentric strength covered. But there's this other term I kept seeing, supramaximal load. What is that all about? It sounds intense.
It is. It basically means that NHE can challenge your hamstrings beyond what they normally experience, even in other exercises.
Like it's pushing them to their limits.
Exactly. It's that extra push that leads to those amazing strength gains.
So we're talking next level hamstring training here. But does this translate into real-world results? Can we actually measure how much the NHE helps, say, sprinters?
Oh, absolutely. Those studies you found by Alt and his team on NHE for sprinters, they're really fascinating. They found some pretty incredible results.
Like what? Give me the highlights.
Well, in one study, sprinters who added the NHE to their training saw a significant boost, like up to a 20% increase in their eccentric hamstring strength.
20%. That's huge.
Right. And not just that, their thigh muscle balance also improved. That's the ratio of strength between your quads and hamstrings.
So it's not just about having super strong hamstrings. It's about making sure they can keep up with those quads.
Exactly. We want a balanced and powerful system. And the best part is these improvements actually translated into better sprint mechanics, particularly during that swing phase where the hamstrings are working their magic.
So we're not just talking about feeling the burn here. It's about real tangible improvements in how athletes move.
Exactly. It's about enhancing performance and reducing the risk of those dreaded hamstring injuries.
That's what we like to hear.
Yeah.
Now, while I was going through all this research, I came across something that really surprised me. It turns out the speed at which you perform the NHE could be a game changer.
Oh, yeah. That's where things get really interesting. We tend to think of the NHE as a slow, controlled exercise. But Augustsson's research throws a wrench in that assumption.
Totally. So what's the deal with speed? Should we be sprinting through our NHEs now?
Well, not quite. But their findings do suggest that a faster approach, what they call a stretch shortening cycle, or NHASSC, can lead to even greater force production in the hamstrings compared to the traditional slower method.
Wow. So faster NHE equals more power. That's pretty mind-blowing.
It really challenges the way we think about this exercise, and it opens up a whole new world of possibilities for tailoring the NHE to specific training goals.
That's what I love about this deep dive, always uncovering those hidden gems in the research.
Absolutely. And that's what makes the NHE so fascinating. There's always something new to learn.
This is so cool. So we're not just stuck with one speed. It's like having a gear shift for our hamstrings.
I like that analogy. And just like with a car, you wouldn't want to start off in the highest gear, right?
Definitely not unless you want to stall out. So how do we know when to shift gears with our NHE speed?
That's where things get really interesting, and it's an area where more research is definitely needed. But based on what we know so far, that slower, more controlled approach seems to be ideal when you're first starting out or if you're recovering from an injury.
Makes sense.
Well,
Got to build that solid foundation.
exactly. It's all about mastering the basics. Then, as you get stronger and more comfortable, you can start experimenting with those faster stretch shortening cycles, maybe even incorporating both speeds into your training for a more well-rounded approach.
Ooh, a mixed speed NHE program.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty cutting edge. Now, speaking of tailoring the NHE, remember that zero to hero progression we talked about earlier?
Yeah, Alt's roadmap to NHE mastery.
Exactly. I think it's how we break that down because I know a lot of listeners, myself included, are ready to put this knowledge into practice.
Let's do it. Remember how I said that NHE is like that choose your own adventure for your hamstring?
Yeah, you're going to level up those hammies.
Exactly. Alt's progression model is all about finding the right difficulty setting based on your current strength and experience. And one of the coolest things about it is you can adjust the challenge in so many ways.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? Where do we start?
Well, imagine you're at the gym, you've got your NHE set up ready to go. One of the simplest ways to adjust the difficulty is by changing the angle of that ramp you're using.
The ramp.
Yeah, the ramp that your knees are resting on. You can adjust its incline, just like you would on a treadmill. A steeper incline makes the exercise a bit easier because your hamstrings aren't working through as large a range of motion.
So it's like starting on the bunny hill before tackling the black diamond.
Exactly. And as you get stronger, you can gradually lower the incline, making it flatter. This increases the leverage and makes those hamstrings work harder.
So by manipulating that incline, we can really fine-tune the challenge. I like it. But what if you're someone who likes to lift heavy? Can you add weight to the NHE?
Absolutely. Remember we talked about how the NHE already creates a super maximal load? Well, we can amplify that even further by adding external weight. Think weighted vests holding a weight plate or even using resistance bands.
Okay, so it's like strapping on extra weight plates, but for your hamstrings? How do we know when it's time to level up the weight, though?
Great question. It's always best to err on the side of caution with the NHE. A good rule of thumb is to wait until you can comfortably do 3 sets of 8-12 reps with good form before adding more weight.
So it's not about ego lifting. It's about those controlled gains.
Exactly. Now, beyond tweaking the load, we can also play around with hip flexion during the NHE.
Hip flexion, so how we're positioning our hips.
You got it. It might seem like a small detail, but it can actually make a big difference in which muscles are being targeted. When your hips are more flexed, meaning your knees closer to your chest, you're emphasizing the glutes a bit more. But if you want to really zero in on those hamstrings, keeping your hips more extended is the way to go.
So we can actually use the NHE to target both the glutes and the hamstrings. Talk about a 2-for-1 deal.
I know, right? It's all about those multifunctional movements.
This is incredible. So we've got all these options for customizing the NHE, adjusting the ramp's incline, adding weight, playing with hip positioning. It's like having a Swiss Army knife for hamstring training.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of it. It's not a one-size-fits-all exercise. You can tailor it to your specific goals and fitness level.
But with all this customization, how do we know where to start? It's a bit overwhelming.
Don't worry, it's not as complicated as it might seem. The key is to start by asking yourself, what am I hoping to achieve with the NHE? Are you recovering from an injury?
Trying to improve your sprint speed.
Maybe you just want to build some bulletproof hamstrings. Whatever your goal is, that's going to dictate how you approach the exercise.
So it's all about having a clear vision before you even get started.
Exactly. And once you have that vision, you can start experimenting with different variations and progressions. Remember, it's a journey, not a race. Start with what you can handle and gradually increase the challenge as you get stronger.
Slow and steady wins the race, especially when it comes to building injury-resilient hamstrings. And before we move on to the nitty-gritty of NHE technique, I have to ask about the mental game. This exercise can be brutal, especially when those hamstrings are on fire. Any tips for staying motivated? All right, let's talk technique. Because we all know you can have the best training plan in the world, but if you're not doing the exercise correctly, it's not going to do you much good.
You're telling me I've seen some NHE fails in my day? People rocking back and forth using their back to lift. It's a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. So let's break it down. What are some of the biggest technical no-nos when it comes to the NHE? And more importantly, how do we avoid them?
Well, one of the most common mistakes is letting that lower back sag, especially when the going gets tough and those hamstrings start burning. It's almost instinctive to round that back, but that's a big no-no. It puts a lot of stress on your lower back and takes the focus off the hamstrings.
Oh yeah, I've been there. That lower back starts screaming at you. So how do we keep our spine happy during the NHE?
Core engagement is key. Think about bracing your core like you're about to get punched in the gut.
Not literally, of course.
Of course not. But that's the kind of activation we're going for. A strong, engaged core will protect your spine and help you maintain good form throughout the exercise.
So it's like the NHE is secretly a core workout, too.
Exactly. Now, another common mistake is using too much momentum, kind of rocking back and forth during the movement.
Yeah, I've definitely been guilty of that. Makes it feel a bit easier, but
Yeah.
I guess that defeats the purpose.
Exactly. Momentum might make things feel easier in the moment, but it actually reduces the load on your hamstrings, and we want that sweet, sweet eccentric overload.
So it's all about control, both on the way down and the way up.
Precisely. Now, there's this concept of the break point in the NHE, that moment when you can no longer control the lowering phase and you have to catch yourself. Some people swear by it, while others say it's a recipe for injury. What's your take?
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of debate about that.
There is, and it's definitely an area where more research is needed. But personally, I tend to err on the side of caution, especially for beginners or anyone with a history of hamstring issues. Mastering those controlled movements through a full range of motion, that should be the priority.
So no need to be a hero and go for that break point right away.
Exactly. Focus on building a solid foundation first. Then, once you've got that down, you can start experimenting with more advanced techniques if you choose to. But always prioritize good form and listen to your body. If something feels off, stop and reassess.
Solid advice.
Yeah.
Safety first. Now, one last thing I wanted to touch on is footwear. I've seen some people doing NHEs barefoot, while others prefer shoes. What's the deal with that?
You know, there's no right or wrong answer when it comes to NHE footwear. It really boils down to personal preference. Some people find that going barefoot helps with stability and foot activation, while others prefer the support of shoes. The key is to find what works best for you.
So it's another one of those NHE customizable elements.
Exactly. Try different things out and see what feels best, what allows you to maintain good form and get the most out of the exercise.
Awesome. This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from the science behind the NHE to the nitty-gritty of proper technique. I feel like I could write a book on this exercise now.
Me too. And to think this is just the beginning, there's still so much more to learn about the NHE and how we can use it to unlock our athletic potential.
Exactly. So to everyone listening, don't be afraid to experiment. Find what works best for you and keep pushing those hamstring limits, but do it safely and with good form.
Absolutely. And remember, consistency is key. Make the NHE a regular part of your training and you'll reap the rewards for years to come.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining me on this epic NHE deep dive. Until next time, happy training, everyone.